when it comes to visualizing research data and concepts, I'm not looking at anything that is revolutionary. What I'm looking at is principles of best practice for you to communicate in a visual representation the data, the ideas, the concepts, the flows that you have uncovered through your research. It might be as simple as drawing a pie chart, or it may be a much more complicated infographic, or even something that goes beyond what we might see today in textbooks, because there's a lot that we can do through visualization of data. The purpose for tonight is really to look at how do I create the best visual representation of my data and my concepts for use in my doctorate or other research that I'm going to publish. Tonight's objectives are as follows: to understand what data visualization is in the context of your dissertation, to appreciate the different forms of data visualization that exist and that we can engage with. And it really does go miles beyond just a line graph or a pie chart or a simple table. There's so much that we can do, and much of that is going to require either the use of software or AI platforms to help us. I want to appreciate consideration in selecting various visualization formats. Our job as a researcher is to communicate our findings. We become storytellers. So it is important for us to select the right visual approach to showcase what we want to explain. The idea that a picture tells 1,000 words applies to every form of visualization. We're using it to draw attention. We're using it to highlight or to showcase something special. And in that respect, we've got to be very cautious when we select the format that we want to use. And it's not only about will the person understand it? It's about how your visualization into the future can be embedded in somebody else's work as well, because each of us as researchers aspire to have not only great research for ourselves, but that our research is a springboard for someone else's research. So our visualizations, our words as well, hopefully will be used by others. I want to understand issues that impact our choice of visualization approaches. And this is where I'm going to take a sort of a viva voce kind of approach, because I'm going to ask you to defend the choice of visual representation that you use. Now, in a viva situation, I may ask you to explain a figure that you created, or I might ask you to explain or draw attention to key elements of a table of data that you have. So we have to think about what impacts our choice, but also we have to be prepared to defend why we chose to represent data or ideas or concepts in a particular graphical way. I want to understand the grammar of graphics, and that's pretty much what it sounds like. It's not about where the commas should be and stuff like that, but it is about the rules of smart, intelligent representation of ideas. I want to explore how AI can be a value add for us as researchers when exploring data visualization. And I also want to appreciate best practice in presenting and explaining visual communication products. Now, there's actually a lot of slides tonight, so I apologize in advance for that, but some of them I'll go through quickly. What I will do is put the slides in our chat group, in our WhatsApp chat group. So if you're wanting to revisit any of them, especially any of the sample visual representations, then they are going to be available for you. I've also put in the chat box here how to join our WhatsApp chat group if you are not already a member. So let's start with data visualization. What is it? Ultimately, it's a big term. And when I see it, I feel like I should be impressed. But actually, it's really simple. It's just how we represent information or data in a visual context. So it comes down to the representation and the presentation of data to facilitate understanding. The end of the day, understanding is what you want your audience to have about your research. The representation of this is the formats that we use. The presentation is how it comes across. And the data is also what did we choose to present and what did we choose not to present. As a researcher, we have choices, and some of our choices in respect of this is actually what from my data sets do I use in my illustration. Now, there's some pretty simple examples. If we were doing our PhD back when I did mine, which is over 20-something years ago, we wouldn't have used color back then because color wasn't considered to be the most photocopy friendly. Today, color is certainly more important. I want to highlight a couple of things though. One, always check your university policy because they're going to want to dictate to you certain styles. So for example, with charts or graphs, it may be, I'm sorry, you cannot use color. It must be pure black and white, or it might be color. So look at some of those policies. But when we take a look at these ones here, going beyond the color, is each of this is presenting data that is similar. But what you're getting is, especially from the 2 on the top, or the 4 on the top, really, is the same data presented in slightly different formats, which can be challenging to be able to understand. And we can manipulate this to showcase things that we want. Why should we care about the idea of data visualization, i.e. choosing which of these is best, and how are we going to make sure it's clear and reproducible and all these other things? It's important for these reasons. One, it's narrative development. As a researcher, you are a storyteller. As an examiner, I have or I can be engaged with different styles of reading. When I read your dissertation before a viva, I'm looking at images first. I'm starting with chapter 3, the methodology, before I do anything else. So if I'm a visual reader, in the sense that I like to see pictures, I like to see stuff like that, that helps kickstart the story for me, and it helps develop and tell the narrative. A good visualization, a good graphic, whether it be a table or a chart or an infographic or a photograph or a flow chart. A good graphic will always help reinforce and draw attention to what's important in your research story. So we as researchers, as storytellers, want to embrace that so that people reading our research, whether that be the formal few people who read our PhD dissertation, or the broader set of stakeholders who perhaps engage with it on different levels, so that they are going to be able to understand it. It is about clarity. If you have pages and pages of numbers and results, writing that in text form is both painful for you and painful for the person reading it. Clarity means that we can use visuals to highlight the most important things that we want to share. That means when I come along and I read your chapter 4 and I read your chapter 5, which is, of course, the main topic, when I read that and I see select graphics, select imagery, I know that this is a focal point. But it also means I get to understand your data in a way that is not just written in text. It is about connection. How do different aspects of your research, of your findings, of the data that you obtain, how do they link together? How do they flow? Because we can see through diagrams, mostly in infographics, we can actually see how different segments of our research come together in an overarching approach, whether that be, say, for example, the development of a grounded theory, or whether it's simply just being highlighted the interaction between different components and how they make up a bigger picture. It's important for accuracy because you want to make sure that not only is it understood, but it's very clearly portrayed in a way that cannot be mistaken. And when we type out text and we do lots with numbers and so forth, it's very hard to describe data. For example, say I just do a simple bit of data analysis about economic performance of a country. To actually write that using text only with no visuals, no graphs, no nothing, to write it using text, it becomes very difficult with the choice of words to explain proportional relationships between different factors or between different elements. It becomes a challenge for me to use vocabulary to really highlight everything in the cleanest possible way. But having a simple picture, whether, again, whether it be a chart or a diagram or a table or whatever, but having that in that format, many people respond to much faster. It gives us explanation and detail. It enables us to highlight more data and provide additional data for anybody who's interested, even if we've chosen not to ruminate on it for particularly long. And the best part about data visualization is the extrapolation, because when you start to get into numerical data, when you start to be able to use graphs, you can see not only what is or has been the case, but you can use it to kind of extrapolate or predict what will be happening or what could be happening into the future. And that gives you even further opportunity as you look at what are the potential future research objectives or what other researchers can follow on from you with, but it allows you also to advise, maybe some policy advice or practical advice also on how to prepare for what might be effectively coming up. So I want to give a little bit of practical advice quickly. Only include visual communication products, okay, visualizations, diagrams, maps, tables, other images that are necessary to your argument. Don't put up a whole lot of visuals in there because you can. So I had a research candidate a few years ago, and it's somebody I know quite well. And this particular research candidate had a multitude of open and closed-ended questions in a survey. And they decided the easiest way for them to present the survey was to present every single question as a visual communication product, i.e. a graph for every single question. And that was absolutely shit, because at the end of the day, it didn't tell me anything. It didn't tell me what I should be focused on. So make sure that what you use, what visualizations that you use are there to reinforce the key points you need. If they don't reinforce a key point or provide in an instant a really strong context of what you're doing, chances are you don't need them and you might be wasting time on them. So you have to think very carefully. What I found important is you are going to end up reusing the visualizations that you create. You're either going to reuse them in journal articles or book chapters that you publish, or you're going to use them as part of lecture materials when you teach students about your topic. And believe me, at some stage in your career, you will, almost guaranteed, you will do a lecture on your doctoral dissertation. I know I've done a few based on my research and based on the ideas. And, that was both for master's and doctorate. It's come back together. So make sure that, whatever you create is fit for using for other purposes as well. I'm not going to show you my first ever visual representation because I don't think I've put it in the slides. But my first ever graphic that I designed, which got used in 3 papers, was not actually from my dissertation. I went to a conference and I was presenting at a conference. And I'm kind of old school, and this was a long time ago. This was the 90s. They had an overhead projector, and I got out a piece of transparency and a pen. And as I was presenting my conference paper, I started drawing this diagram on the overhead projector to kind of bring together what I was talking about. I never wrote it into the paper. And then I realized, oh, wow, I've got something. So that became the basis of a model for a particular style of teaching, actually. And it became the basis of a model. And what I learned is the first time I digitized it, I drew it up. In fact, I used Excel to draw it up on my office computer. And I had to use that for 3 different papers that I published. When I look back at it now, oh my God, it's terrible. It's shit. It really is quite a bad drawing. The concept is fine, but I didn't put enough emphasis into making it a clean visual representation. So, I want to emphasize the fact that because you're going to reuse these, because you've got multiple audiences, that you are going to want to connect with. And because other people want to understand it, do the best job you can the first time around. So invest your time as you're writing your dissertation. Invest your time now in making a strong visualization, a strong visual communication product. And I want to highlight a lot of things come down to we're trying to do it ourselves. As researchers, we do our own data collection, our own data analysis, our own writing, all of that. But sometimes we can't do everything. I'm not a visual person. That's why, that one I told you about, that model that I developed, it looked horrible. I'm not a visual person. I can't think of it in that way. 1995. Okay, 30 years ago, we didn't have AI. I didn't have a lot of help. Now we've got the opportunity of AI. Now we've got the opportunity to draw up what we think it should be. It's ethically appropriate and acceptable to get, say, for example, a graphic designer or a visual artist, or someone who's better at presenting ideas visually, to draw up what we have based on our ideas and our discussion of it. That's acceptable. And I would encourage you, if you're like me and your visual presentation skills are not the most up-to-date in many respects, by all means, get help. Pay a professional graphic designer or a graphic student, art student, to help translate what you have as an idea into something that is visually attractive and enduring, long-lasting for your thesis. The good thing is it becomes easier to develop these visuals as we grow as an academic. Mine have improved, but I still have friends who help me with design if I need it. The last thing I published, I did not do the graphic for that. I talked about it with my co-author and we played. At the end of the day, she took care of that. And I'm grateful because I still don't think I'm there yet. You will figure out that there's a framework, that there's a strategy, and you'll get there. Minimize waste, generate data, models, code, figures that will generate value in the future. So this is not only just the reusing. You've got a whole lot of data at your hand. When you are developing the visuals that go into your doctoral dissertation, it's also appropriate for you to think at that time, what might I need for a publication? And concurrently generate that data and translate that into visuals at the same time, even if you're not using it in your dissertation. Because once you drop it and you move on and then you come back, it becomes very difficult to, I guess, synergize sometimes, okay? So, think about where you're going to use it. Ultimately, what we write in our dissertation and what we represent in visual formats in our dissertations are an investment. So we need to strategize very carefully with that. We have to be aware of copyright and permissions, and I'm going to do this very quickly. Copyright legislation reminds us we must reference or cite the original source for any materials you have not created yourself. If you are creating it yourself, you need to source that as author. So any visualization that you create, say, for example, a flow chart or a diagram of a theoretical approach, grounded theory, for example, approach that you've created, always make sure that you cite yourself, source, author created, because that's going to showcase the difference between your originality and whether you've taken, borrowed, used from others within the academic community, which is also acceptable. But we have to be very transparent about it. Now, if we are using images outside of something that we create, it is a little bit different in our doctoral dissertation compared to, say, an undergraduate essay. In an undergraduate essay, I'm going to be citing the source. In a doctoral scenario, especially, your examining committee is going to expect to see that you have sought permissions, and permissions are written authorization to use a particular image from another scholar's work. And usually this comes from either the scholar or the author themselves or from the publishing house. Now, it's very easy. Nobody's going to say, no, you can't do this. But the ethically correct way to go about it is to go onto the website of the publishing house. There'll be an area to apply for permissions, and you plug in the diagram or the figure that you want to use, the book reference, the page, all of that. And they'll come back with an email that says, yes, you've been granted rights to use this for the purpose of your PhD dissertation. Now, this is simply just about checks and balances. Differing universities may have stronger or weaker standards of conduct in this, but for the majority is you will be expected, if it's a diagram or a photograph or a map, you will be expected to have obtained permission to reproduce. There is a little challenge for us sometimes. If we don't get such appropriate copyright permissions, it may limit publication of your research or citation of your research because other authors, other universities have higher standards, of which case you can't be cited because you haven't got permissions to use in the first place. So it may be disadvantageous to you. It's a practice that we have to get into. It's not something that, as an appendix to our dissertation, we have a file of permissions given by publishers, but we do keep a copy, and we keep a copy with our supervisor so that there is a track record that you have done the ethically appropriate thing. Now let's move into the different types of data visualizations. And the list is on the left, and that lovely picture gives us a few ideas. And we get the idea of tables, graphs, diagrams or figures, maps, photographs. They cover the bulk of the style. We have infographics. Now, these can be both static or dynamic. So static is what we see there. It's typically, it shows an idea, it represents something. Dynamic now allows us to see comparisons, to be able to see changes over time that might be color-based, or if we're presenting our research in a digital, say an online digital format, we might even get into the videographic. Now, a dissertation itself does not preclude us from using something like a motion graphic to represent an idea. There are creative ways of incorporating that into a dissertation. But if we're presenting to other stakeholders, for example, maybe community groups, it may be a short video format that we use to highlight. And one of my favorite uh, motion graphics that presents research data is this beautiful version of the Earth. And it shows over time how temperatures across different sections of the Earth have risen with global warming from, say, 1800, 1850s onwards to today, given the data that's reported. And that's a very dynamic presentation, but it's impactful because when you watch it for 2 or 3 times, you start to see what's really happened there. Now, tables, we all know about tables. I don't want to bore you with them. At the end of the day, if you're going to do a table, don't make it overly complicated. And I think I'll just get a terrible example of a overly complicated table from something I did a long time ago. I've just got to see what page it is. I had a table that went through multiple page. Oh, yes, here we go. If you can see my screen, this is actually from my master's dissertation a long, long time ago. This was a table that I developed, and it took 3 pages. That was not a good table because it was too much data. It didn't have a focus. That table should have been put as an appendix, and certain select important details I wanted should have been summarized in something much shorter like this, so I can see the key points or the key data at that very time. Graphs are typical. We often do a pie chart. Pie chart, I'm going to say, is incredibly primary school. And I do apologize for anybody who's used pie charts. Rethink your decision. Pie chart is one of the first things we learn. It doesn't give us any analysis. It has no advantage in many cases over a simple table of the same data or a couple of sentences listing the data out itself. So at doctoral level, I would not be impressed to see a pie chart within your dissertation. Bar chart, area chart, line graph, scatter plots, all that. Yes and no. I mean, they have their value, and this is why it becomes important for you to decide what represents your data the best. These are not the only examples, and there are other ways to do pie charts that are more engaging and maybe a little bit more appropriate towards doctoral level of presentation. But you really do have to spend some time looking at what's possible. Going into Excel, you get a reasonable amount of choices in terms of the types of graph that you can present. Now, a couple of things if you're going to do a graph. One, you've got to do it in such a way that the people viewing it, the readers, can understand it easily as you. If you give me a graph or a chart and I can't understand it, then you've failed as a research communicator. Okay, that becomes the big challenge for you. You have to find ways to make sure they're good. Now, Excel, as I said, will give you a lot of choices. Going into some of the AI platforms will actually help you compare and look at what is going to be the most appropriately communicated one, and to be able to view how others might see it as well. This one's quite a a nice sort of representation of a table. So, you've got to think about, for a chart, what is it that you want to show? Are you showing relationships? Are you showing distributions? Are you showing the composition, how something is made? Are you trying to do a comparison of different factors that influence over a period of time? So when you know not only what your data is, what story you want your data to tell us, then it helps you determine what type of visual you want to use. We can use things like diagrams and figures, and this is just a literature map that I picked out of one of my my other webinars. But as a diagram, you've got to be able to look at it and understand the relationship. This particular scholar has used shading. The darker gray shows us a central point. It's held together through the circle. It's held together in terms of order of importance with 1, 2, 3, 4, from history to social innovation to participatory design to scenario planning. Then we factor out, we go into lighter shading. We have solid lines versus dashed lines. Each give a story about either how something comes together or whether they are directly related or indirectly related. So we're using very simple design principles, just the colors, the size of the box, the dashed versus the solid lines, even the thickness of the solid lines, to indicate a hierarchy. I'm automatically drawn to history because it's one of the 4 biggest boxes and it has number 1 in there. So there are clues for your reader as to where they go. We might look at a map. Now, maps are very, very challenging, and map design, cartography has changed significantly over the centuries. And even in the last 20 or 30 years, the way in which maps are curated for dissertation purposes have changed significantly. This would not be a map I would want to reproduce in a dissertation because there's too much data on it. It gives a macro view, but it doesn't guide me in any way as to where I should be focusing on first or how I should focus through that. Now, the great thing is now that it is much easier with the help of AI and different online platforms to actually generate a map or to integrate your data into an already curated map to represent what you want and what you need. Now, something to think about, we're often, I guess, made to believe that we have to fit within the A4 page of our dissertation. When it comes to doing maps, feel free to go much bigger and have them as a fold out, which can sort of, fit within the A4. And then as you're using it, you fold it out to get a much bigger map. If you have a lot of data or if you have a bigger geography to perhaps cover from that. We also have to think about photographs. And this is fascinating. This is the same photograph, but one has been altered and one is the original. Now, I'm going to ask you a question and just think about it for a moment. Which one of these photographs is original, the left or the right? It's an interesting question because it's going to highlight a point. But I'm curious, just pop in the chat box whether you believe the left photograph is the original or the right photograph is the original. Just give you 20 seconds on that one. So far I see people saying left is original. That's nice. I'm curious why you would think that. Now, I'm going to give you 2 perspectives on this. I actually cannot remember. I'll be honest, I cannot remember which one is the original. But I believe the right is the original. And the left has been turned into a black and white image rather than the left being the original, which was then colorized. Either way, the image has been distorted. If you believe like me that the right hand, the color image is original, turning that image into a black and white gives us a different sensation of time. We feel it is older. We feel it is more serious or more stern. Even you look at her face, which is identical. She looks more personable in color simply because the color helps. Um, it's a distortion. It's designed to make us rethink or designed to make us think about something in a slightly different way. Now, if you guys who said left are correct, and you may well be, if I'll go through my notes later, I'll find out. The left, we have taken a black and white photo. We may assume, because it's black and white, that it is historic, although I can't tell. The earrings kind of look like they could be a bit more modern, but that doesn't matter. We might assume it's historic. We've colorized it. So we've made assumptions about this individual and what she would have looked like maybe 100 years ago. Let's assume it's 100 years old. We've made assumptions about what this individual would look like 100 years ago in color. That may or may not be remotely true. The thing with photographs is using them, you have to take them in their entirety. You can't crop them down so it looks like it's going to be something else or takes out some of the context. You can't colorize or decolorize them because it changes the mood. It changes the perception of the photograph. You can't distort them. I can't stretch it. Say, for example, you know, she looks quite a attractive and pleasant lady. Maybe I want to talk about obesity in the female population. So I stretch the photo horizontally to make her look a little bit fatter. Um, Even though the image itself may look natural, because it's not that hard to do with the tiniest little bit of stretching. It's a distortion. And it's a distortion designed to encourage your perception of something in a way that is not transparent or is not ethical. So with photographs, we must be extremely careful for that. Data visualization, and that's really the last point from the photos, data visualization is not neutral. Data visualization, the way in which we present this, the way in which we see this, is biased. You know, if I look, maybe this is an original black and white photograph. I've colorized the photo. I've given her a particular skin tone. I've given her bright red necklace because I want to showcase power. I've given a choice of green for the outfit she's wearing. And the green itself is quite a luxuriant green. It's quite sophisticated. It certainly isn't your everyday off the shelf from Kmart type of green. So I've already distorted or biased the photograph. She looks like she has money. She's got nice gold earrings, which may have been made from the lids of drink tins, for all we know. But it looks like expensive gold earrings. It looks like quite comfortable, luxurious clothing. It looks like potentially expensive jewelry. I've introduced bias into my visualization. Every visualization has the potential to be biased. So visualization is the result of numerous choices involving a range of people. So those who want the visualization to be made, you, those who are making it, which might be you or others, and anybody in between, which is your respondents, your supervisor, your examiners. So many people have a different perspective on it, okay? But at the end of the day, visualizations are not, I don't want to reuse the word neutral, but they're not neutral. They have an inherent bias in them based on the choices primarily that we make as a researcher. So we make decisions. We make decisions on what data to use, what to include, what to exclude, because believe me, I know we all exclude data that doesn't fit our narrative. And we make decisions about narrating or telling the story about what we're visualizing. This is an affluent lady in the early 1920s. We can see from the fine clothing that she's wearing that she clearly comes from money. We can tell from the jewelry that she clearly comes from money and is certainly at least middle class, if not further. Now, I'm narrating a story. I know nothing about this lady. I know nothing about her background, but let's look at the black and white photo. This is a young lady who is struggling in society. She's wearing throwaway clothes that have come from Hessian sacks and other disposable cloth that she's found on the streets. Trying to appear like everybody else, she's bought or she's managed to find some cheap, tacky costume jewelry to wear so that she can fit in different situations. Same photograph, two very distinctively different narratives. Now, there's the problem. As a researcher, we are about telling the truth. So we have got to make sure that the imagery we use is as neutral as possible, but is as complete or honest as possible as well. It's also about the people, them, who interpret data visualization as appearing neutral. Most of you guys who commented in the chat box actually said the black and white photo was the original. I mean, that's probably naturalistic thinking that, you know, black and white predated color, kind of sounds about right. It's actually easier to make a color photo black and white than it is to make a black and white photo color. But we've sort of taken on board our own bias into it. That's got to be the original. We'll go with that. So you're bringing your own layers of bias into your viewing of what you've got. Now that adds another dimension, is that bias is also going to coincide with or conflict with the narrative that is written. So when you see that photo, and I gave you two stories, correct? I gave you two narratives about the rich lady, about the poor lady. Your own bias will determine whether my story fits the photograph or my story doesn't fit the photograph based on what you think is right. Whereas, sorry guys, I'm the researcher, I'm the one telling the truth, or I'm the one supposedly telling the truth. Therefore, as the viewer, you actually put your own bias into how you're interpreting my research based on the graphics or the visualization that I use. Now, in Aviva, are you going to be prepared to justify your data visualization decisions? As an examiner, I may very well ask you to defend why you have done things a particular way, why you have chosen to represent something. I already know you've done your research. I want to know about the decisions. So if you got me as an examiner, you may, suddenly find yourself having to explain that. There's also an aura of objectivity, and it comes down to, two-dimensional viewpoints, clean layouts, geometric shapes, lines, inclusion of data source. The simpler something is presented, the easier it is to not impose biases onto that. Doesn't mean it won't happen, but it's easier to minimize the biases that you have. This one's quite good. You know, this sort of looks at two-dimensional viewpoints, and it's designed to bring your attention to a particular area, or it's designed to make things feel like there's a us and a them. Not that there's multiple shades. In fact, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shades, 5 different categories of data that are represented within. There's actually 6 categories, by the way. There's 6 categories of data that is represented within them. One, it's England versus the United Kingdom, so us versus them. And then within England, it's us versus them because we're geographically separating out a certain set of factors or a certain set of conditions within different geographical regions. It's also very difficult to tell because unless we're incredibly expert at English geography, I'm going to get very lost trying to figure out where some of that data changes. Two-dimensional viewpoints also come down to what type of visualization, stylistics do I want to use? Both of these maps, all 3 of these maps, my apologies, all 3 of these maps show the same data, but they show it in a different stylistic. The first one, the geographic view, is probably the one that we are most common with. You know, we see it most frequently in that respect. The second one gives us a sort of a pixelated viewpoint. And when we look at it, it sort of brings me to a different set of theories. It actually brings me to an old geographic model from 1919, I believe, or somewhere around then, that looked at the hierarchy of cities to towns to villages. And it actually used similar representation at the time. The third one, the population view, is a very different organic approach. For most of us, we might struggle with interpreting the organic population view approach. It's a very different style because not only does it sort of not contradict, but challenges our understanding of maps and our understanding of simplicity. It becomes very artistic in a way, and it doesn't look like it's representing the United Kingdom in this case. It kind of looks like a bird's nest. And it might mean that although it's pretty for a book chapter, it's actually going to distract the communication of your message if you were putting that into a dissertation. Clean layouts is something that's very important. Just make it as simple and clean as possible. You want to be able to instantly look at something and see that, okay, this makes sense. The colors represent something, the sizes are proportionate, they represent something else. There's a structure to it, which means there's a logical structure. When I go back to population view here, my bird's nest, I don't see that clean structure. I don't see what I need to be presented in respect of that. So in here, I see some cleanliness. We might choose to use geometric shapes and lines, and this is actually quite a popular tool. I've also done communication research. A long time ago, I did some communication research based on classroom interactions that actually utilize similar diagrams. There's a group Harkness.ai, which has created an AI tool to analyze communication patterns within Zoom calls, so that you can reflect on who's speaking, who's interacting with whom, what's the tone of voice, what's the duration of their wording, what's the frequency of certain words, and so forth. And this gives us a beautiful diagram like this. But when we use this, again, it must come down to, we're not presenting something pretty because we can. We're presenting something that is instantly meaningful to the people who are engaging with our research. Personally, this is something I would see in a textbook, but I would cringe if I was seeing something like this in a dissertation, because it takes that extra bit of timing to think about how to interpret it. Then let's take a look at the inclusion of data sources. So graphs give the impression of being open and transparent. When we cite or we source information that was in the graphs, that identifies what methods have been used. For us to believe a visual, we want to see evidence of its heritage, of its origin. There's a technically correct provenance. We want to see its provenance throughout, from data collection until data presentation. Now, let's take a moment to look at when visualization goes wrong, because it goes wrong a lot. And what we don't want is a situation in your dissertation where you've spent a lot of time creating a graphic, a table, a chart, a diagram, or even setting up and taking an appropriate photograph. We don't want a situation where you've spent a lot of time on that, but it's missed the mark, i.e. it's failed to represent what is important. So it boils down first to your research. The graphs are only as good as the data they display. If you've done a survey or a questionnaire, make sure your questions are worded in such a way that the data, the responses you get, the data you get from them actually are meaningful. I've seen a lot of surveys from PhD candidates, from master's students, globally, from people who are part of the third degree, from people who are outside of it, where questions have been asked, and I've looked at it and said, this will give you data, but it will not give you useful data. So data visualization starts right at the point of data collection design. What I would like to encourage you to do is to think about how you want to present your data when you are actually designing the collection tool for your data. If you can think about how you are going to represent the findings in your writing, in your dissertation, it will also help you think about the design of the approach you're using to get there. So again, it comes down to graphs are only as good as the data they display. If you know what you want it to look like at the end, then you need to wind back and say, am I designing my data collection instrument? Am I designing it in a way that will give me the type of data needed to be able to produce this type of visualization to highlight the story that I'm telling? Here's some great ones. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about these. I'm going to go for the one on the right-hand side. Where does your food comes from? We take the peach, I think it's a peach, the piece of fruit with the stone in it. 51% versus 49%. I'm pretty confident the piece on the left with the stone is way more than 51%. Visually, it doesn't add up. The lamb, 52%. Again, it's a representation to invoke either an understanding or a reaction. The problem is the accuracy of that representation makes me question the accuracy of the data as well. When you try to be overly creative with something, and this is, albeit, probably not based purely on academic research here. I mean, this is the sort of thing I would expect to find in a newspaper, for example, but it proves the point. When you're being overly creative with the visual approach, you may end up, as a result, having people question the authenticity of your data. If we look at the federal subsidies on the left, and perhaps we shouldn't, because I think in Trump's America, there's no more subsidies for anything. We're actually finding that the visual representation and the relational representation of the numeric values, the numbers, the money is different. If we look at the left-hand side, we have carbon capture and storage at 2.3 billion, which is not much bigger than traditional renewables at 12.2 billion. There's no connection. There's no logical relational value of representation between them. So to me, although that gives me something that may be great for community outreach, it might be something I want in a town hall meeting where I'm presenting my data, it's not going to be good. It's not going to be strong in a dissertation approach. This one I love, looking at fast food. I'm trying to figure out from McDonald's whether sales are under 5 billion or they're at 40 billion because, the M dips down. This one's really quite challenging because not only do we have a situation where all logos aren't created equally, it's a nice way of representing something. And not every logo is square. Not every logo has the same proportion. So it's very difficult to come to grips exactly what it means. What's fantastic about this is they've popped in the back the GDP of Afghanistan at 21 billion. Oh, that's confused because we have data about fast food companies, Starbucks, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, KFC, Wendy's, Burger King, and Macca's, or McDonald's, sorry. And then suddenly we have something about Afghanistan, which probably doesn't consume a lot of any of these products. Its relatability isn't there. This is, again, it's a nice, cute graphic if you're teaching a class, if you want to highlight a point, but it's not a strong one that really conveys an idea. The only thing it conveys is that McDonald's is certainly dominating the market. What I don't like about it is for each of the brands, you see 4.1 billion in sales, 4.3 billion in sales, 8 billion in sales. The 4.1 is above the 4.3 and is above the 8 and is above the 8.2. I'm getting confused in my data. How much do you have to tell me? What is going to be important? So out of this, you've got to be more selective about what it is that you would like to communicate through this, and whether the communication of it in text inside the diagram, inside the graph, the 4.1 billion, the GDP of Afghanistan, does that contribute or does it distract from what we're trying to see? This one's great. Weekly poll. We asked you, would you pay more for your milk to help dairy farmers? It looks like 50-50, but 87% said yes, which graphically is half, and 13% said no, which is also half. The other one, I love this, gun deaths in Florida. It's about the number of murders committed using firearms. And this was actually a political tool designed to make it look like the numbers had gone down. They flipped the axis. And what it actually shows is as you go from, sort of 2010 towards the end part where it has 721, what looks like a decline is actually a massive increase because they've flipped the numbers upside down. Overall, the trend has been since the 1990s through to the 2010s, there has been a general decline in numbers, but there's also been a most recent increase in numbers. So this is a misrepresentation because we want to look at a graph instantly and understand it. But when it's presented in such a way to not confuse, but to misdirect you, then of course it becomes a misrepresentation, and that's not a good thing. So let's talk about design principles and practicalities. Really, it's about how to choose between tables, figures, and text to present data. I'm not going to talk really about this, that I'm going to share that in the notes. I kind of want to move on, but at the end of the day, your choice as a researcher and as a communicator is deciding which is the best way to present what type of data for what purpose for your audiences. There are 4 frustrations that good figures will avoid. Okay, so if you're designing a figure, some things to avoid. Concerns about improper image manipulation. Be very cautious about that because I'm always going to want to compare what you have with the original that was taken. Not understanding the point of your figures. Now let's go back to this. And we'll take the weekly poll. I don't know what the point was because I'm misdirected with the presentation. So of course, as a reader, that instant that I'm trying to understand it, I'm not necessarily getting it. One of the things that you can do, and I highly advocate for doing this where possible, when you have constructed a visual representation for or to include in your dissertation, share it with some people who are not so familiar with your research. See whether they can get that instantly, see whether it makes sense to them straight away or not. Because if it doesn't, you may not be communicating as effectively as possible. We run the risk of readers losing interest in our paper because our graphics are too complicated. So let's go back to something. Let's go back to something like this. I understand it because I've worked with stuff like this. But the truth is, the first time I came across something like that, I really had to spend time to get my head around it. It looks great, but ultimately, is it going to be clearly understood as soon as you get into it? And we don't want to waste time in assessment and review in the publication process either by creating something that a journal is going to come back and say to you, we can't use this, it's too difficult to reproduce, or the scale of it doesn't work for our publication, and so forth. And that's why I say, as you're writing your dissertation, be very clear about the graphic, the images, etc., that you want, and put your time into making them strong then, so that they're going to be fit for multiple purposes. You don't want to draw something for your dissertation to have to redraw it, recreate it in a different format for a journal publication, or worse, recreate it a few times for a few journal publications, and then recreate it for a town hall presentation somewhere. So, really spend that time early on. The design principles to think about. Clarity is king, okay? Simple and clean, that's all we care about. You design for print, not for screen. This is the most important thing. While most of us work in PDF documents these days, the reality is a doctoral dissertation is still being assessed from, most likely, a printed copy. I know if I'm asked to assess one, I want it printed out so I can write, make notes and annotations, etc. So all the design that we do is about designing for the printed document, not the laptop screen. We want to avoid JPEGs because they don't turn out very well in, sorry, they don't turn out too well in the document unless we're working with photos. If we're doing something, a table or something, we want to be able to create it as a table in the software we're using. We want to avoid converting images between formats because that gives us a little bit of deterioration. When you're printing, make sure your text is legible. Now, I'm going to go back to this one. It's not really the perfect example here, but a lot of us will do a graph and then we'll have text in there. And by the time this is inserted into our dissertation, the text will be so small that we can't logically read it and be comfortable with what it says, or we can't be certain that it is exactly what it says. Avoid fancy backgrounds, including color blocks. So weekly poll on the left has a gray color block on the background. No. On the right, it's simple and clear. This one, no, because you've got a map, you've got a color block. Actually, it's just unnecessary clutter that doesn't help us. The one on the left here, probably better. Okay. And we have to think about color versus black and white. This is one I can't answer for you. I want to tell you, do it in black and white, because in many cases, we are printing our dissertation in black and white, but times change. And this really comes down to what is the policy that your respective university has. Do they allow or encourage you to print and to design in color? Or do they still have more old-fashioned ideologies like me that say black and white so it's easy to scan, it's easy to reproduce, and so forth? Understand what your university wants first, and then stick to that. Now, here's the thing. If your university says, look, color for visualizations is okay, great. Make sure there is first a consistent design for all the visualizations throughout your dissertation. And that includes the color schemes that you are using, the representations of different things that you're using as you progress through. Don't have different colors in every graphic because you wanted it to be different. You want to showcase where the consistency is. Color actually helps us to represent consistency or consistency of tone. So be very mindful of how that will be and how that will be perceived. Photographs, setting yourself up right. So if we're not getting permissions to use other people's photographs and we're using photographs that we have taken ourselves, then it's time for us to enhance our photographic skills. Okay, so master your technique, capture the right images, capture them many times. If you're going to take a photo of the equipment that you've used, take 30 photos so that you can choose which one is actually just the best. Because there will be differences, slight differences in each one. It also gives you a chance to, in case a file gets corrupted, for example, it gives you a chance to have an alternative one that comes through. Always save your figures at high resolution and in the right formats. For a journal, it requires 600 dpi or above, but check with your journal. So again, the planning is not only what do I use for my dissertation, but what am I going to use in my future publications? Which also means keep all of your original image and file figures, figure files, sorry, imagery and figure files so that you can come back to. But also if you're asked to evidence that they are original to you and not to somebody else, you actually have that proof that's there. So when you create a visual, think about your university guidelines, think about your journal guidelines. And often you're going to have to intersect those two so that you're addressing two end users at the same time. So typical consideration will be figure width. So the width of an image on a page. Now, in terms of a dissertation, it's obviously constrained most cases to A4. Now, that's fine. A4 may be portrait, or it may also be permissible in landscape, as the example I shared before from my master's. You know, that had a landscape version of it. But a journal guideline is not going to, or most journals are not going to permit you to have a figure that takes up a full page. They're going to expect it to be scaled down. They're going to expect it to either fit into columns or fit into a part of a page, not a full page. So you're going to have to think about that. You're going to have to think about what file type they want. That's both, journals here will be more rigid than your university, but you've still got to make sure you're using software that is going to enable or facilitate you to publish as a dissertation and also as a publication. If colors allowed, is it RGB or CYMK? What are the font size and the type? So for example, are you using Arial 12 or are you using Times New Roman? Arial being a clean font, when it's scaled down into smaller types, it's easy to read. Times New Roman becomes more challenging to read as you decrease its size, especially on a diagram as you're trying to fit that diagram within a page. You may find that the choice of font, as well as its size, actually inhibits the viewing of your diagram. And you want to think about things like line weight. And let me go back to one that I showed you earlier in the session. There we go. So, this is used coloration. It's used lines and dashed lines. It could have also used thick versus thin lines to indicate levels of importance, for example. So we want to think about the weighting, the thickness of, the thickness or the weight of our lines. Do they represent something? What's the hierarchy? How is that communicated? It's not only does it look good for you and can it be reproduced, but what is the hierarchy or the range or the level of importance that is communicated, and how is that expressed through the visual. Now, I'm going to ask to take a 2-minute break for a moment, please. I need to head to the bathroom. I've been talking for a long time. I know I did tell you it was going to be 2 hours. I want to do grammar of graphics very quickly, and then I want to do AI quickly as well, and then go into a Q&A. But do give me 2 minutes. I'll be back, and then we'll continue with this. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for allowing that short break. Let's kind of move on. I would like to wrap up this so I can go into a Q&A. But I really do want to get on to the AI side of things, because I think that's important. But let's take a few moments to reflect on grammar of graphics. And this is really just about structure, about rules, more than anything. Grammar is sort of the basic elements of an area of knowledge or a skill. And that's just kind of like scaffolding or structures that we use. And graphic design, at least in the terms of visualization of research data, does have some very basic scaffolding. To be fair, with technology, especially with AI, this has expanded significantly in the more recent years, but still underpins it are some fundamental rules about transparency, about honesty, and about ethics. The grammar of graphics is actually a textbook, and it's kind of, I'm going to say it's really heavy to read. I have made an attempt. I didn't actually succeed at reading the whole thing, but I did make an attempt. But it really comes down to the one point that's most important, the framework for thinking about any graphs. And I just want to get you thinking in your mind about the structure of what is there. I want to move into AI and data visualization. So give me, I think it may be 5-10 minutes on this section, and then we can do a Q&A session. I want to talk about AI and how it helps us, because I recognize myself as a researcher, I've got very poor graphic, visual presentation skills. And because of that, what I design as a table, what I design as a flow chart, what I design as a model is not the prettiest. I can design the concept, but somebody else has to digitize it for me. AI helps us in a couple of ways. One, It certainly helps us with our data processing and our data analysis, although I would still encourage always authenticate that the outcomes that AIs produce match with manual processing. But it does help us in taking that data and presenting it in a visual form that's both standard, so our typical charts, our pie charts, our line charts, our scatter plots, and so forth. But it also helps us with creative visualization of data. So there are a number of reasons why we can use AI. It speeds up the idea to visual process. This is the part that I have a problem with as a researcher. I know what my data says. I know how I want to write it up. How do I draw it? Because it takes me forever to take something and to draw it up as a model. But AI can do that, or can offer us versions, multiple versions of it quite quickly. And that actually makes it more productive for us. It's still our data. It still requires us to understand the data and what the AI suggests, and to say, yes, this is good, or no, this isn't good. It still requires that, but it helps us get a digital version, a digitized version of it much faster. AI offers us design suggestions based on the data that we input. Now, this is the thing that I find most fascinating, and I've gone to a few sessions, a few conferences where I've looked at people working with big data and how they can overlay multiple data sets of big data and create three-dimensional visual representations, which are fantastic, out of this world. More than we need for a PhD. But what it reminded me is I would never have been able to think about drawing that. I would never have thought about using that as the way to represent the data I've got. I think in very simplistic terms. I think in high school graphs, bar charts and stuff like that. My mind doesn't think about the new approaches, the new styles of representing data visually. AI does. So you can give it some data and you say, I want to do something like this or like this or like this, and it can output suggestions for you. And then you can look at it and say, you know what, this stylistic, this design, this approach, and you can compare them, because your job as a researcher is also to show which one is better for communicating, excuse me, for communicating to your audience. So it's useful for people like me who aren't confident in software, who aren't confident in graphic design. It also reduces a lot of repetitive tasks. We will spend a lot of time on formatting, on layout. We know everything that's in there. We know the content, but we have to then go and design each one. We've got to set up the legends. We've got to set up so many different things. It actually speeds up the process for us. To me, I have no problem with that, because as long as it's your data and you understand and can explain it and can interpret what's there and agree with it, it's acceptable. The other great thing is it integrates well with tools researchers already use. So I've actually used AI to do a few things, visual displays for me for different little projects. And it's gone great with the data, the basic productivity software that I use. So it integrates well. Ultimately, it saves you time on tedious tasks, which you're probably not that skilled at in the first place. But as long as you're using your data and your viewpoints and your feedback to refine it, because as you produce something using AI, it's also your responsibility to continue to refine it and then to make sure that it's accurate, i.e. not distorted in any way, or not, as free from bias as possible. So the comment at the bottom is, look, AI doesn't replace you. It gives you more time and space to focus on your analysis and message. That's important. You still need to know, you need to deeply understand what you want from a visualization. You're guiding it. You're just not drawing it. At the end of the day, as I keep saying, you may be asked to defend that in your Viva. So what can AI do? What can AI do for you? It can generate very quick charts and graphs from raw data. It can turn key findings into infographics. It can convert dense tables into visual summaries. So tables of data like that 3-pager I showed you from my thesis could actually be summarized and put into a simple diagram in a way that I might have taken weeks or so to have thought about it, or probably never even thought about it at all. It gives new possibilities based on other thinking as well. It can create conceptual diagrams or mind maps. And again, you can then manipulate those and adjust those to reflect your own understanding, but it will give you a starting point. And it also can enhance accessibility through auto captioning and alternative text tools. So being able to make sure that what is included there is actually the key points that is needed to communicate. So one way to think about this is outsourcing the first draft of your visuals. And I think that's a good thing. I will pay a graphic designer to help me do some of the things that I want to do. At the end of the day, I can actually get it for free from AI, and I can get it a lot faster. I still have to have the same level of input. I've still got to communicate what I want. I've still got to share the data or the ideas. And I've then got to reflect on it and decide, is this what I really wanted? If not, what are my recommendations for changing it? So it's just the same to me as getting a designer. Now, there are some ethical and practical considerations. And here's why I say, be a smart user, not a blind follower. Always verify your AI-generated data representations, okay? When you're getting any visual representation out of AI, you want to go back and you want to make sure that, it's actually represented the data you put in there. AI is known for its inaccuracies. It is getting better. And it ranges between 50% and 95% accuracy, depending which AI tools you use. At the end of the day, it's your responsibility to go through and just make sure everything actually matches up, okay? But make sure that you avoid over-reliance. So the visuals have to match your narrative, your discipline standards. Don't just let AI generate some stuff out and you go write about it. Okay, you've got to make sure that it's generating it to the level required that also reflects upon the narrative you've got. And it might mean that you have to, as you see the visuals and as you see things in the data that AI has illuminated that perhaps you have not previously thought about, you may have to change your narrative. And that is acceptable as well. Now, here's a challenge. We need to respect confidentiality. For many of us, the data that we collect does have elements of confidentiality. Anytime we upload something to AI to help us with analysis or help us with visualization, we have to ask whether we would be breaching our ethical responsibilities related to confidentiality. Is there a way that this data set, because anything uploaded to public AI platforms is used to train and it's accessible to other people in different ways, we've got to make sure that there's no identification of respondents, for example, or anything that could highlight something that might be of an illegal nature or might highlight unethical practices of a certain respondent or organization. So we've got to be very cautious about that. That's the biggest challenge that we're going to have with AI. It can do a lot of things for us, but it also takes our data. And we have got to be very cognizant about what we have promised our respondents and whether or not we're going to breach that by using AI in helping us prepare something. Always make sure that if you've utilized AI to generate a visual, you cite the AI. So if you create it yourself, you cite it as author, created by author. If you create it through an AI platform, it's citing that AI platform and its version that was used to create that. That's transparency. That's being an ethical researcher. I don't expect you to hand draw everything yourself because I'm like me, you might not have those skills. But if you've used artificial intelligence to do that for you, then you need to be transparent about that was it. It's the same. If I'm analyzing my data, I acknowledge what software I use, whether I used R, whether I used SPSS, whether I use some NVivo or Atlas TI. I'm acknowledging that. I'm just acknowledging the AI as being the graphic designer for my data in this case. So AI tools help us a lot, or can help us a lot, but the academic responsibility still lies with us as the researcher. So ultimately, we've got to make sure we're very comfortable with it. Now, a few tools that you can use today, and I'm going to post this up in our group chat. Excuse me, I'm going to post this up in our group chat anyway. But these are some of the tools that you can use. I believe the free tools, or the ones that we've got access to, that you can use. I've used a few of these. I will say I've not been a fan of Canva, for example. I'm not a fan of Gamma. There's still teething problems, but I've learned how to overcome them if I want to use what I get from it. So at the end of the day, explore, experiment, but also recognize the shortfalls. There's a diagram that I've got that I'll try and put up on our social media in the next day or two that actually lists a lot more than this in terms of tools that are out there that can help.